that time. At this time, we will call the meeting to order. Please call roll.
Chairman Baugh,
Here.
Vice Chairman Dibble,
Here.
Commissioner Schrader,
Here.
Commissioner Zarguni,
Here.
Commissioner Miller,
Here.
Commissioner York,
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Here.
Commissioner Mandel is absent, and Commissioner Salazar Garza.
Here.
Quorum established.
Thank you. At this time, are there any public comments that are general that would like to be taken into record? Seeing none, I will close the public comment portion of it and look for a motion to approve the absences.
I'll make a motion to approve the absences from the prior commission meeting.
Second.
A motion first, or I got a motion and a second. All approved, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the consent public hearing items. Are there any items that any of the commissioners wish to pull off of the consent agenda and move to the public hearing portion?
I would like to hear the plat case numbers, item number 7, as a separate item, please.
All right, any other items? All right, at this time, we will hear from the consent agenda items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8.
Permission to proceed? Yes, sir. For the record, David Stallworth, Senior City Planner, and I'd like to read into the record tonight's docket, which consists of the following. We'll have 3 replats, 1 preliminary plat, which is conditional, 2 final, well, that one's been removed from the consent agenda. We also have 2 final plats. We have a public hearing for zone change, and we also have a public hearing for a text amendment. The following items are as follows. We're going to start off with first plat item, 21 PL 1100, Ocean View Addition, Park Block Lot 5R. The replat is located north of Elizabeth Street between 5th Street and Santa Fe Street. Moving on to the next item, 21 PL 1025, Industrial Technology Park Unit 3, Lot 2. The final plat is located north of Old Brownsville Road and west of South Padre Island Drive. The next item on consent is 21 PL 1096, Kings Crossing Unit 22, Block R, Lot 17, or correction, Block 1, Lot 17R. The replat is located west of Cimarron Boulevard and south of Oso Parkway. The next item for consideration under consent is 21 PL 1072, Montrose Park, Block 1, Lots 3A, 3B, 4A, and 4B. The replat is located east of 25th Street and south of Ruth Street. The next is 21 PL 1109. It's Industrial Technology Park, Unit 4, Block 2, Lots 1 and 2. The final plat is located south of Bear Lane and west of SPID. The item which was pulled off consent was 21 PL 1076, Saratoga Downs, Unit 4, preliminary plat. We were recommending conditional approval, and there were 4 conditions of approval. I'll get into those as we go through that in individual consideration. Next on the docket is a public hearing for rezoning for a property located at or near 810 19th Street, case number 0821-06, City Bakery. The rezoning is for request to rezone from the CI Commercial Intensive Commercial District, or Intensive Commercial District, and the RM3 Multifamily 3 District to the CI/H Intensive Commercial District with a historic overlay, and RM3 /H Multifamily 3 District with a historic overlay. And finally, we have a public hearing, which is for individual.
That's individual consent.
Sorry?
That's individual consent.
Okay. Okay, my apologies there. And last, we have for individual consideration, Unified Code Text Amendment, which is an ordinance of the City of Corpus Christi, adopting text amendments to the UDC, which involve the addition and removal of certain language contained in Articles 1, 4, and 7 that are relative to landscaping and tree planting in single and two-family residential zoning districts.
Thank
That
you.
concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Awesome. So at this time, we're going to consider questions on 2 through 6 and item 8. Are there any questions of staff before I open the public hearing? Seeing none, at this time I'll open the public hearing for items 2 through 6 and 8. If anybody wishes to speak on those items. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion on items 2 through 6 and 8. Or further discussion.
I make a motion, we approve items 2 through 6 and 8 as presented.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to item 7, please.
Permission to proceed.
Please.
Once again, David Stallworth, Senior City Planner, and I'd like to introduce Saratoga Downs Unit 4 preliminary plat. The request involves 2 parcels of land that are situated in Lot 6, Section 7, Bohemian Colony Lands, and consist of 33.01 acres more or less. The project's area is specifically located at 1802 Lands Road, generally located along the north side of Lands Road, east of Harwick Drive. The current zoning is RS6 and RS 4.5, and there is a zone change pending from RS6 to RS 4.5, so it can be completely homogeneous. And the petitioner is MVR Construction, and the agent is Urban Engineering. So what's specifically about this preliminary plat, they are trying to plat 214 single-family residential lots, 1 public drainage channel, and approximately 8,700 linear feet of public street. What makes this thing unique is because of the RS6 zoning, they have a smaller lot footprint, and they are also requesting to have a diminished internal street grid right-of-way of 40 feet, whereas local residential usually or typically calls for 50 feet of right-of-way. After significant negotiation with the department and with the applicant, we got them to agree to to allowing the 40-foot proposed right-of-way, but installing double-loaded sidewalks. The original intent was to have single-loaded, and we didn't agree with that. The second condition is that they're going to provide a cross-section of Martin Street and Lands Road. Reason being is because they're going to improve their half of those 2 streets which run through their property. They're both, I think, C1 collectors. So we've agreed to allow them to give a cross-section to include curb on both sides to prevent any further drainage overflow or drainage impact onto adjacent properties or onto the street, much that had occurred, I think, probably further north of the site, near the school site, where they had some issues with regards to flooding and overflow, or sheet flow overflow. The next condition is that the petitioner is going to be responsible for paying, has a fiscal responsibility for the condemnation and connection to Lands Road. Right now, in order to facilitate that portion of Lands Road to connect with the existing portion, it has to go through a strip which ownership is undetermined. So after, again, significant negotiation, we got them to agree to work with our legal staff to go and work forward with the condemnation to create the pass-through of Lands Road. And they're going to be financially responsible for that. And last but not least, they're going to be seeking a UTP amendment, or Urban Transportation Plan amendment, because through their project, I believe there is a parkway collector which runs through a third of their property, which they are eliminating from there. I think it begins at Martin Street, and it goes eastward, then trajectories southward to Lands Drive, and then connects with an existing platted right-of-way to the south and goes past Saratoga Drive. So what they're going to do is they're going to get rid of that portion which is contained within their right-of-way or their project area, and that's going to need a UTP amendment.
Aren't we shifting that over to Martin?
I don't know.
Yeah, that'll be shifted.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Any questions?
At this time, questions for staff. Commissioner Sheridan?
What I was trying to understand about that, I guess, is mostly just a little bit of how these steps are in order, and largely, so currently this conditional plat has the lot size such that it for the 40-foot right-of-way, not the typical 50-foot. So if that's not approved later, they would have to replat to a reduced lot size? Is that how that works?
They're arguing that the cross-section is in fact supported by the UDC. The question that we brought to their attention, or the item that we brought to their attention, is that while that may be partially correct, it only supports one-way traffic through a residential development. It's pretty explicit on that, yet they want to invoke two-way traffic on these internal rights-of-way. So, and again, they wanted to put single-loaded sidewalks, and we disagreed with that. And again, through negotiation, we worked with them, and we still kept the 40-foot right-of-way, but we did get, double-loaded sidewalks.
Right. no,
Commissioner, if I could just, I'm sorry to interrupt you. The short answer is yes. If the street waiver isn't granted, a redesign would be required, but we as staff are supporting that future street waiver with the final plat.
Okay. So that has to basically get through us, city council, and everything.
The street waiver will only have to come to planning commission, so when that final plat comes through, associated with that will be, just like you see sidewalk variances and other wastewater variances, you will see a street waiver that's tied to the plat.
Okay.
That says the condition is installing the sidewalks. We support the narrower right-of-way. The 28-foot pavement is not being touched. You will still have that same pavement section. You will now have the sidewalks on both sides, but that gives the developer a little more flexibility with those housing options.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies for misunderstanding the question over here, so I'm kind of.
No problem. Thank you.
That works. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing for item 7 at this point, if anybody would like to comment. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion to approve item 7 or further comment, or, I don't know if you could deny that one, but motions?
I'll make a motion, we approve item number 7 as presented by staff.
I second.
All right, a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to item 9, text amendment.
Good evening, Commissioners. Andrew Demas with Development Services. As you know, we're here talking about one of my favorite ordinances, planting of trees. And as you may have received an updated ordinance that had a few changes and discussions that we had with the Coastal Bend Home Builders Association. We had a fantastic meeting, talked through every issue. Of course, that was on the mountain of also stormwater fees and our development services fees, which I'm happy to report the budget passing yesterday on first reading. So that's one step closer to getting us into the new fiscal year. But nevertheless, we did have a pretty good discussion and time devoted to where can we tweak the tree ordinance to accomplish the goals. Of course, we have a ton of environmental goals and things set forth in Plan CC as well as area development plans, but where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, what type of impact will it have to the building community for requiring at least some form of tree planting? So from what I understand, our monitors are not working this evening. So all of you should have received a printout of the PowerPoint. So I'll just quickly go through it. Most of it is a recap from what you've already heard at the past meeting, but I will go through it. So first, facts about Corpus Christi on page 2. We are in the western Gulf coastal plain, and that relates to types of soil conditions, types of floodplains. Where are we on the map? We have a relatively flat topography. We have an annual precipitation of 26 to 37 inches. We are the 7th windiest city, and our soil composite is roughly 71% Victoria clay. So why now? What is of course, there is a motivation for encouraging and fulfilling goals of Plan CC, but that's where I say it's promoted by the comprehensive plan. We want to encourage tree protection. And then lastly, positive contributions to the environment equal positive contributions to people. And what are those positive contributions? As you'll see on the next page, as you've heard over the many weeks, stormwater is a topic we take very seriously. So some of the things that involve with trees, for instance, a mature live oak can absorb 40,000 gallons of stormwater runoff. That is not just a made-up statistic. That is coming from several different, granted they are arbor foundations, but the science is supporting that it will directly contribute to reducing the amount of runoff that goes into rights-of-way. Of course, the less amount of runoff, that is the longer the lifespan of the right-of-way lives, because it no longer is impacted. They say the worst enemy to asphalt is water. So the more you can absorb on-site, the more you keep off of going into our rights-of-way and damaging that drivable surface. It has to do also with treating the quality of the runoff. Trees naturally absorb nitrates, phosphorus, petroleum runoffs, and heavy metals. As you've heard over these discussions about driveways and not parking in your yard, some folks are even trying different things, the old style kind of 2 sidewalk driveways, because they are finding their natural soil still filters to a degree. It becomes a natural biofilter for those chemicals in small amounts coming off of their vehicle. So We're essentially coming back to what we learned in the 50s of how sidewalks and driveways should be built, of a little more permeability to allow materials to flow through it. Contributes to the heat island effect. Just one tree can change the difference of 10 to 20 degrees under that canopy of ground temperature. That directly relates to our energy costs. Of course, as we live in South Texas, every day that we get these heat advisories, that is why it stays till 90 degrees at 9 o'clock at night. It is not just because the sun has gone down, but all of that ground radiation that's been absorbed is now discharging back up into the atmosphere. Having that ability for tree canopy coverage reduces the amount of sunlight and UV radiation that's hitting the ground, therefore that is less ground radiation coming back up. We do live in an area that does have air quality questions. We are built on an industry. So that is not to say that we are polluted or contaminated in any way, but every tree helps in scrubbing and providing that much more oxygen for our daily needs. Of course, pedestrian safety, study after study contributing to health effects is trees encourage people to get out of their home, to get back on the sidewalk, to get on that bike, to get on that sidewalk with their kids, which of course contributes to physical and mental health. The more you're walking, the more you get moving, that of course is good physically, but it helps you clear your mind, which means the stresses that we deal with, even writing about trees causes stresses, so I had to take a few walks myself. Next, we have the tree survey. So as you'll hear through many council meetings, we always talk about the 7 cities above us. What do the other cities in Texas do that are similar to Corpus Christi? Those other cities have in one form or another some type of tree requirement. So this is not some alien concept that no other city has done. This is pretty much standard. Now, how we approach it is the question. Some cities choose to use a percentage, just like we have maximum building coverage. They, for instance, San Antonio has a 38% tree canopy cover requirement. Other cities just say, based on your lot size, you're required X amount of trees. Some other cities say, based on the square footage of the home in some cases, you may have to put in based on that ratio. So there are several different ways that they try. Some cities even give you options. You can have canopy tree, ornamental tree, understory. So we've tried to take the best of all these worlds and form some type of hybrid ordinance that works for us in Corpus Christi, because we're, as much as I like to say, we try to be like other cities, we need to be Corpus first. So we need to come up with an ordinance that works here versus some of the different weather and soil conditions that exist in other cities. So I say all of that because we do have primarily clay soil, or we are the 7th windiest city. We have to try to find something that works a little more specifically for Corpus. So on the next page, we have existing development. This is to show that the process does work. These are neighborhoods that were taken a week before I gave the Planning Commission the last briefing to show that there is tree planting. These are trees that flourish, so it's not you plant a tree and it's going to die, it's not going to survive, or the homeowner's going to remove it. No, these trees do exist. The neighborhood has taken care of them. Of course, some of the trees could have used a little bit of pruning, but for the most part, they were all in good condition of good caliper size. The next page is just to show that we didn't limit ourselves to one part of the city. As I've spoken with a few council members, we didn't want to pick on one district over another. We tried to show the districts that have the most new single-family home development occurring, and in some cases where trees have been planted, and you've seen kind of an older phase of a subdivision versus a newer phase where, as you'll see on the next page, there are no trees planted. This is essentially the epitome of the heat island effect. It is a lot of concrete and a lot of asphalt, which means there's a lot of runoff. This is exactly the issue we're trying to address. As you can see on the District 5 picture, there's just one sidewalk and you have some bumpers overhanging it. And that's not to pick on that developer or that specific development, but imagine the change that can occur by just at least having one tree. You would provide a little more shade. People would feel a little more confident when they're walking down the street. They're not having to push a stroller in this 114-degree weather. At least there is some coverage. There is some safe passage. On the next page, we get directly into the planting requirements. So as you'll see on a page after that, which I'll get to, this is just a recap of what was presented at the last Planning Commission, the one canopy with a street in the street yard and one understory tree on site for RS 4.5 and RS 6. In RS 10, 15, and RSTF, it was 2 canopy trees, and as those zoning districts go up in size, the tree count goes in tow. So FR being a 5-acre minimum requires 5 trees. Even if you're in the ETJ, is we still had to cover for properties that still come in for a building permit because they get water contracts from us or some type of other service. Since they are half acre and up, they have a little bit more room to play with. So we still have a canopy tree requirement on those ETJ properties. Next is the size. They would have to be a minimum of 1.5 inches in caliper. And we did give an option that if you're predominantly sandy soils of some type where not every tree canopy works, you would have the option of using a similar palm size. In this case, it would be a palm of roughly a 5-foot trunk height. So how those trunks are measured is roughly equivalent to 2.5 inches in caliper. Now, next is the direct result of our discussions with the building community and outreach through surveys and what we could find, and that is year one. So starting October 1st of this year, if this ordinance passes, we would recommend 1 canopy tree or 1 understory tree in the street yard at a minimum size of 1-inch caliper versus the 1.5. The question is, why? What's the big difference? The difference specifically is the supply chain. In speaking with different builders and some of their contracts of who they select for tree supply, there is an abundance of 1 inch and not a whole lot of abundance of 1.5 inch. So giving that community time to catch up, essentially the producers of trees have to have time to grow them, have time to get them to the right size. So using the supply of 1 inch will give the building community the ability to plant a tree and not have to reach in a very small group for the 1.5 inch. Of course, as we know, supply and demand, if there's fewer 1.5 inch, the price of each tree goes up. Since there is more of a surplus of 1 inch, the price should not fluctuate too much. Of course, I'm not in the tree business, but a greater supply means there would be more steady of a price and therefore availability. Now, going to year 2, which starting in October of 22, the original standard would then kick in as the ordinance is written. 1 canopy tree and 1 understory tree in the street yard. Of course, it would need to be outside of setbacks and easements, and 1.5 inch caliper in size minimum. Now, next we have the tree types, and why this is important, as you'll see on 2 slides, you have canopy trees and understory trees. The difference is simply just in name. A canopy tree is typically your primary tree that will give you the most coverage. Your understory tree, if that becomes the only tree on your site, that essentially will grow to the canopy tree size. There used to be an old saying about goldfish. The goldfish will grow to the size of the pond that it's in. If an understory tree is the only tree in sight, it has the ability to flourish that much more. I know because I have a giant crepe myrtle in my front yard, and that is technically an understory tree. If it's trained and nurtured and grown correctly, it will grow to that large size and will provide more shade than you would think. So that is why we thought about opening the list of possibility of tree species to both canopy and understory, give more options to the homeowner. Instead of trying to force 2 canopy trees into that short yard, having 1 canopy and 1 understory will give a little more flexibility. Now, moving on to the site plan, as you know, we reduced the ring requirement in the newer version of the ordinance from 8 feet to 5 feet. 5 feet is generally gives a little more, again, room for the developer or the builder to move that tree on site first. Second, the goal was just to keep it out of our easements. Now, that is why it's important when tree selection occurs to look at the area where utilities are planted. This is a little bit of responsibility on us as we do the plan review, but also on the builder on their tree selection of which species of tree have more of a horizontal root pattern versus a vertical root pattern. That establishment is important up front because, of course, you don't want to plant a tree too close to your water line or a wastewater line because it will eventually wrap around it if there is, God forbid, a leak. So, again, lessons I've learned firsthand of why it's important of where you plant a tree. Again, it's 1 canopy and 1 understory in that street yard, a 1.5 inch caliper at year 2 as we have that implementation plan. And of course, again, the goal is to keep it outside of the easements. On the next page for existing development, the only change that has occurred to this change to this language We did add a section, so on letter C where it reads 9.2.1E, those are about properties that were destroyed or damaged and received grant funding from either Housing and Community Development or the GLO for a rebuild, that they can have a reduced planting requirement of 50% off, essentially. If you required 2 trees, you would only have to plant 1 tree. We added a line that also included section 9.5.2, and don't worry, you don't have to have that memorized. That simply says if you have infill lots that are 25 feet wide and are less than 5,000 square feet, so we're talking about areas of the west side, areas of this central core that are smaller lots that we want to see development, but simply even have less room to work within our 50-foot lots, would only be required to plant 1 tree. The page after that, under maintenance enforcement, if you have a copy of the ordinance, you should have a copy also in front of you. We did add a few lines under maintenance enforcement. This is all about the 1-year inspection. So once a tree is planted, we would give a time frame to go out and verify, of course, the tree is still there. It's not plant one day, get your CO, and then move on and uproot the plant, move it to the next lot, file for another CO. The tree does obviously have to establish itself. So that section of the code talks about that within so many, I believe within 9 months, we have to go out and check at a minimum that the tree is still there and is still being, somewhat healthy condition. Of course, wintertime, the trees are falling off, or the leaves are falling off. We understand it's the season for it, but at least some attempt is being made to keep the tree alive. Now, moving on to, if there are any questions, that essentially what I want to wrap up with enforcement. And then there's some other slides in the back of just random data that if you're ever interested about, for instance, how much water does it take to plant a tree, or the types of soils we have, or even in some cases floodplain impacts, all those extra slides are in the back of the presentation for your reference. But if you have any specific questions, I'd be more than happy to address them.
Good job. Good report. Commissioner Miller.
On the 4.5 and 6, it says canopy tree in the street yard and understory tree on site. So does the understory tree, could it be in the backyard?
Understory tree would both have to be in the street yard, so in the front yard. Now, there was some discussion with the Builders Association about moving to something like 2 trees on the lot. The difference is, the only thing that concerned me the most is if we start allowing the trees in the backyard, I don't want to interfere later with if somebody wishes to build a pool or a patio or gazebo, and now they're going to have to uproot that tree and move it. The goal is to keep the coverage along the street, get people out on the sidewalk without having it in the backyard and potentially creating a problem down the line if they wish to build something in their backyard.
Can you clarify that? Because I thought, oh yeah, the wording says on.
Okay, it
one
should
in
be
the
street yard.
and one on site.
It's a good catch. Thank you.
And then the other question that I had was, is any consideration given to, let's say, God forbid, another hurricane comes blowing through here, and there's a big percentage of the homes that are damaged beyond the 50% value. And I know from experience that the insurance company gives you like $2,500 to haul off and cut up trees, but making people go through the added expense during a difficult time like that of
Sure.
plopping a couple of trees in there might be a little onerous.
Absolutely, I agree. Hurricane events, we can always plan for them, we can write language for them, but when it actually happens, it's the old saying with Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so I say that because we had to make very tough decisions when Harvey and Hannah occurred, that entire sections of structure were lost that were, let's say, encroaching into setbacks. And do we as a department want to kind of add insult to injury to say, hey, sorry you had an illegal structure, you can't have half of your home back? Obviously, no. We take into account nonconformities. We look at the degree of the nonconformity. If it's as simple as the tree is the only thing holding them up, obviously we're not going to hold up their building permit for that. That is not the goal. If there is significant damage, and while there's not a definition of significant, we do look at it case by case, that if a tree cannot be saved, and we would of course encourage the homeowner to replace it, but we're not going to stop them from getting their building permit or moving back into their home because of a tree. That's just not the right thing to do in that type of disaster situation.
And if, I know it's extremely rare in this area, but if a development has, preserved some existing trees, you get the credits for those
Absolutely.
existing trees, correct?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's all the questions I have right now.
We encourage that. We want tree preservation.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Dibble?
I mean, just a couple of comments, and I'm appreciative that staff actually went and bought back and talked to the building community. I wish that would have been done from the get-go.
Yes, sir.
But I guess better late than never. But just, a couple of observations, and I'm not opposed to landscaping. I'm not opposed to trees. I'm not opposed to the environment, but I am passionate about home affordability. And we're in a good time right now because interest rates are low, but each and every one of these actions that we take to increase the cost of a house prices citizens in our community out of the market. This is going to price people out of the market. Development services fees going up 84 cents a square foot over 2 years is going to price people out of the market. And I just want to caution the city, be careful what you ask for, because I hope 20 years from now, you start saving money today to fix the sidewalks that are going to get repaired, especially on these smaller lots. I hope you're saving money today to buy additional brush trucks to be able to haul this debris off. The survey that was sent out was probably the most one-sided survey I've ever seen, just to check a box. When I take my kids to the mall and say, gee, do you want this or do you want that? But no consideration is paid to how much is it going to cost. None of that was even included in the survey. All things being equal, yeah, give me this, give me that, but are you willing to pay for it? And so I'm going to say shame on staff for writing a survey that was just a means to an end. And I get it, y'all were pressured to come up with this ordinance as quickly as possible. Tried to get it ramrodded through the first time, but I'm disappointed in the process on how this was taken care of, and I think we can do better. That's all I'm going to say.
Commissioner York?
Thank you. I was going to wait till the comment, but if we're doing comments now, I guess I'll start by saying I think the intent is great. I also like trees. I'd love to have trees everywhere. It'd be great. But I do have issues with the way it's gone through. And just real quick, so a few specific things that I've noticed just very quickly, and to back up a minute, I'm a consulting engineer for land development, so I'm the person that has to take people through the process. And so I see these things, and I know and see and anticipate when we're going to end up having to go before a variance board and delay a process 2 months over little things. The kind of stuff that we ended up doing UDC text amendments for, last year to fix, so we wouldn't have so many variances. I see a lot of potential for that in this ordinance because it was quickly written. But one of the things I saw specifically was not tree related at all, but the maximum impermeable cover was reduced from 70% to 50%. And ultimately I have no real problem with that, other than I think there should be some exceptions. Again, you're going to have variance problems, and there's certain parts of town, and maybe all of town, but especially in the times we're in now, there's a lot of people living multiple families to a house. They have lots of cars. I live on the island. Lots of people have boats and just multiple cars. Almost everyone's driveway I see is either the whole yard or most of the yard. So I think this is going to affect a lot of people. And that's not affecting developers. That's the home builders that want, more driveway. The other thing was really just the no exceptions. And again, we've seen that in other things. And those are just small examples. The main issue I have with this is just the process. And again, I would love to see a tree ordinance go through, even with the reduction in permeable coverage. That's fine. But I really dislike that this has gone through without the appropriate vetting process, in my opinion. So to make an example of that, we just did a bunch of UDC text amendments that some were way less than this. And we spent 6 to 8 weeks or so, multiple meetings with a diverse stakeholder community, from the community. And we vetted this and we changed things and we tweaked it. Probably still not perfect, but we worked out a lot of kinks. I think this deserves that. I also think it needs to go to the public so they can have that input. And I agree, the survey, it seemed more like, do you want a pretty city or an ugly city? Oh, you said pretty. Okay, they want trees. But it didn't say, do you want to pay for them? Are you willing to give up driveway space? That kind of stuff. And I think the public needs to see all the facts and make a decision. And hopefully, if they're for it, great. Let's put it through. So ultimately, that's my 2 cents. I think this should go back to staff. I think it should be vetted. Oh, the last thing I thought it was kind of ironic in the last meeting. We were presented with this ordinance to take action on it, and then right after that we had a briefing on a area development plan or a corridor, I forget what it was, and that, which is a non-binding plan they're going to create, was going to go back and have multiple stakeholder meetings and surveys, public input, but then this, which is a pretty big ordinance overhaul, didn't get any. And I realized we went back 2 weeks, and that's great, but I still, I don't think most people in the city got to get their input. So I would really like to see this go back and go through the proper process with a diverse stakeholder group, public input, and the whole 9 yards. And that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Commissioner Miller, you still on for a question?
Yeah, we got some. I didn't know we were going into comments like Michael, but.
Well, we can either open up for public or before or after. It doesn't matter. You can make comments now.
Okay. So, I shared with Andrew privately, and I agree that the tree survey was, do you like trees? Do you not like trees? You're really hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't like a tree. So, so I did my own kind of survey, and I pride myself in surrounding myself with a diverse group of people that represent a really good cross section of this community.
I was tracking the comments, so I was reading along.
Right. There's a couple observations that I made because in addition to, would you rather live on a tree-lined street or a barren street? I put in, the implications of what the cost is going to be, the maintenance and the responsibilities that goes along with tree ownership. It's almost like having a pet. You got to take care of it. So, so the responses were really interesting. The first go round, I think it kind of depends on who comments first, and then everybody either piles on one side or the other. But the first posting was very positive in favor of the tree ordinance, despite the costs and everything else. Second posting was a little more, started off leaning against, and I think there was probably 3 people that didn't like trees out of over 300 comments. The other comments were kind of falling back on. Most of the arguments against was with regards to an infringement on public or private property rights. And but overall, it was about a 3-to-1 in favor of a tree ordinance. And one of the most poignant comments that I got was from Bill Wilson from WKMC Architects. And, he made a really good point. Most of the RS 4.5, this is really going to primarily affect RS 4.5 and RS 6 developments. Most of the people that are doing, rural estate or any of the RS 22s and things like that, it's a higher price point, and landscaping goes along with that. So I drove around to a couple of neighborhoods. I drove around to the race car driver streets over there behind the Walmart, like Labani and all those roads. It's an old, I think that subdivision was probably developed 2004 or 5, something like that. And, that's the type of house that this is going to most greatly impact. And it's typically a starter home. And, those folks, they purchase that home, and then they live there for a while, and their conditions improve, and then they step on to the next. and landscaping is not a priority. So looking at those streets, you know, there's a couple of people that have chosen to plant some trees and stuff like that, and it's, you know, they're doing okay. But you look at some of the Brazelton subdivisions like Rancho Vista that was built in the past 10 years, or you go out to Kings Crossing that's, you know, 20 to 30 years old, and there's a lot of mature growth, and most of those have homeowners associations that govern the landscaping in those areas. So I think it's a great idea to have something, because one of my biggest complaints about the way Corpus Christi grows is we're not like a nuclear city like Austin or San Antonio. We can't grow out from the middle and then kind of contract and stuff like that. We kind of fan out because of our geography and the coast.
Right.
So I always invite people to start at Ocean Drive and Doddridge and drive all the way to London and watch the growth and how the city's grown from there. And you know, some of the neighborhoods within a mile of the coast are always going to be extremely nice, but then it gets bad, and then it starts getting good again as stuff gets newer and newer and newer out that way. So as we continue to grow to the south and to the west, it would be nice that some of these neighborhoods that are being developed right now have mature trees and slightly more beautified. So I'm going to be in favor of this one.
Thank you. Commissioner Schrader.
I guess I just want to convey a couple observations I've made since the last meeting. The focus that I had even in the initial meeting was, is this something that we can that we could realize, that homeowners, buyers of these properties and things could realize value in? We certainly know that neighborhoods can realize value as a whole, and properties can appreciate and value areas where trees are established. That always requires people investing to maintain them and to keep, you know, things growing. But I think in some ways this kind of thing helps start that process, maybe, hopefully. The challenge, of course, also is at the entry level, is how do we make homes affordable? And that's really not what's on the table here, but I think Commissioner Dibble touched on it, is that each little incremental thing that gets added, it's still going in the opposite direction. But in my opinion, in the larger question is the entry-level home market, the way we do it, the model for it is just broken. We're not going to get it back down to that with the model that currently exists. We don't have the workforce for it. There are many things broken about how we build entry-level homes, and this is an environment that exacerbates that. So this particular item, in my opinion, is not something that is going to make that, is not going to contribute to that being unattainable in any significant way. And I think the additions that you've put in here for the following year confirmation that the trees are still living and things help to lend that to be of value to these buyers. So I do appreciate that has been added. And hopefully as we look to add these kind of things in the future, that we'll be cognizant that these are really large, even these small things like this one item have repercussions in a number of ways, and they're not just something that are easy just to, hey, we need this, let's put it in. So that's not, I realize that's not, you guys are not the ones that just pull these out of thin air, but it does make it a challenge. So I think that's what we need to keep in mind because when we do decide to try to change the model that is broken for entry level, home ownership, it's going to take a concerted effort, and it's going to take a lot of participation and really thinking outside the box, because a market like this needs it, and people really should have the ability to own their own home, but they're going to look different in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Zargini.
My question is in regarding the maintenance and enforcement. I know we're saying that we're going to make the builders have it on their site plan, have the plan for the trees,
Sure.
and before they get their certificate of occupancy, make sure that it's, I guess, in place. But because I remember 2 weeks ago we discussed about the fact, if I understood it correctly, that homeowners get the opportunity to, if they don't want to, remove the trees, or is that enforcing them to maintain the tree and
Yes.
making sure? Okay, that was changed. Okay, I
Yes,
just want to
and
make
thanks
sure.
to Commissioner Miller's kind of poll, a common thread, a common comment I saw is, well, if trees are required, somebody should be monitoring to make sure they stay planted. So it really kind of resonated with me that we have that for commercial requirements already. For every landscape plan, for every commercial building built, we're supposed to go out a year later and verify the landscaping is still alive, especially after an event like a freeze. Now, that's not, that means that the day everything thaws out, we show up with a clipboard and say, look, here's your 5 citations. But it is nice to touch base and to say, look, I mean, we understand that you've lost your landscaping, but if you would at least try to get it back to where it was. We know it's going to take time. We know every supplier is hit right now. But that's where we have good, fostered relationships with our building community to say, our job isn't to throw a yellow flag every time. It's to just bring things to their attention and get to the goal, of the code. But if it takes a little more time, that's where we try to be reasonable.
I see. And my next question is, we're talking about certificate of occupancy, and of course, I work with a lot of builders. I know a lot of the builders in town, and a lot of the builders, when they build their properties, they may get their certificate of occupancy without having their home sold. And my question is, what happens if this property doesn't sell for a few months? To what extent the builders shall be responsible in terms of obviously maintaining the trees, because you put these trees, if you're not taking care of it, it's gonna die, and what happens then? Because I can see this could be an issue with some of the builders already.
Right, that's what we call the handoff. Where does the transition happen between builder to homeowner? And so we do have some language built in that if is there a declared natural disaster, and that would include, storm events, heat, flooding, you name it, we could have a declared disaster or some type of supply chain interruption in which we can give that builder 6 months to install their landscaping. So
does that mean that they have to put it, install it back if it's dead or something? You know
Well,
what I mean?
that's already in the code to say that if you lose your landscaping, you do need to replace it. But that buffer time, what I'm calling, is to give that builder the time for somebody to move in and then install the landscaping, not to hold the CO hostage. Because just like we're talking earlier
Okay.
about storm disasters, we're not going to hold someone's building permit hostage because of a tree. It doesn't make any sense. But if there is a good faith effort, no different than you see time extensions with plats. If there's a good faith effort that public improvements are happening or something is moving forward, we're going to work with that builder to get the landscaping installed, but at a reasonable time, because our goal isn't to have dead trees. Our goal is to get the trees in
Exactly.
the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments before I open the public hearing?
And so that would also potentially allow selected trees.
Right. The buyer would have direct input of, pick from your 30-item list which tree you prefer. Some people prefer pecans over lavender or crepe myrtle or oaks, and they would have that design flexibility.
That was another.
Let me pick my tree. Right.
That's a good way to address that.
Okay, at this time, I will open the public hearing if there are any comments from the public. Mr. Brazelton just hung out for the meeting. Anybody? All right, we will close the public hearing and entertain further discussion, motion, comments, or thereabout.
As Commissioner Miller, I move that we approve the tree ordinance as presented.
Do you want to change anything about the understory tree comment that you had to the?
Well, I didn't see the on-site comment in the actual agenda packet. Is it just in this presentation, or? Okay, but just for clarification, that the ordinance reflect that both the canopy and understory tree both be in the street yard.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Okay, Chairman Ball,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Dibble,
Oppose?
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Zarguni,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner York,
Oppose.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Aye.
Commissioner Mandel is absent, and Commissioner Salazar Garza.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the director's report.
There's no director's report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else to be scheduled or on the agenda? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you.